I'm so pleased you've joined us for another episode of the After Dinner Leadership Podcast, and for me to introduce you to our guest, Tim Lupinacci, who is CEO of Baker Donaldson, a law firm in the United States. Now, why do you do what you do? And one of the reasons that I was driven to do this podcast was that I want the youth of today, the young leaders of today, to be better than the ones that are currently in more senior positions. And I found a kindred spirit in Tim, in that he not only leads a great organization with over 1,000 employees, and they do a lot for their community, but he's made time and carved out time to ensure that he puts some of his talents and skills into developing a not-for-profit organization. He could have easily found an excuse not to do that. It inspires me that he's made it happen. He's taken a thought, an idea, an aspiration, and actually put it into action. And in his own way, helping the world with a small w, helping the world that he lives in to be a better place. I think that's great leadership. So listen out for how he makes that happen on a daily basis. And I think it will inspire you to take some action of your own. Now, fortunately, there's room around this table for more than one person. And we'd love you to like and share this episode to those that you think would benefit from hearing our after dinner leadership conversation. Enjoy. So welcome, Tim Lupinacci, to the After Dinner Leadership Podcast. We're really pleased to have you with us.
Well, Simon, I'm thrilled to be here. And as I've mentioned, I really have gained a lot of value from your leadership in these podcasts already. So I'm excited to get to talk to you some.
It's nice to add you to the alumni. And whereabouts are you dialing in from, for those who are listening? Where are you dialing in from?
Yeah, I'm
today?
actually in Birmingham, Alabama, which is the southeast United States.
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you. Our tradition is to ask immediately some quick fire questions just to get to know you in a slightly different way. Are you ready for those?
I am ready. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Name.
Tim Lupinacci.
Organization.
Baker Donaldson.
Industry sector.
It's a legal firm, professional legal services firm.
Current position.
I am the CEO and the chair of our board.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
It's funny, I got asked that recently, and I answered Let's Go Crazy by Prince.
Okay, what's a cause you're passionate about?
Our firm has been very focused on trying to help eradicate homelessness in some small way. It seems like it's ever present and increasing in challenge, particularly in our footprint in the United States. So we're really trying to help partner with other organizations in that area.
Great. Who inspires you?
You know, I really get inspired by individuals who have obstacles in their lives and they're really working hard and committed to overcoming them and trying to achieve a great goal, which could be even just getting a degree that they didn't get. That's sort of the universe of the people that really inspire me. Certainly there's a lot of individuals that do as well, but I think that's what gets me most motivated.
Yeah. Why is that?
You know, I don't know, because it's interesting. I don't feel like I had all these big obstacles when I was growing up. I think I was very supported with my parents and had great opportunities to achieve or to accomplish things that I wanted to do. And I don't know. I think it's that passion and drive when someone has fallen down or has had setbacks, which I've had setbacks. I've made mistakes and I've had to have that resilience to get back up. So maybe it's just seeing the human nature of, you can accomplish your dream, your ambition, even if you had a side pathway away from it for a while. And I think it's just, I love that passion and fire that people to really now have a vision on what they want to do. So that just gets me really fired up.
Good. Well, I'm going to love this conversation. I mean, so some of the guests that we have on, I know and have worked with for some time. Others I have not known until we've started the conversation. But I'm always keen to ensure that we have people on that inspire me in some way. And in our research for you, Tim, I've really loved this aspect of your giving back and wanting to give back to society in some way, which is one of the reasons that was the gravitational pull to say, I need to speak to this guy. What's going on? Find out more about it.
No, that's great. Yeah, and it is interesting when you think about how that develops, right? Because I do have this fundamental belief that the whole idea, to whom much is given, much is required, and so
Yeah.
I've received a lot of benefit, from in my journey, but I guess it's just part of that. Then I want to help others, it probably does go back to, I always was inspired by this idea I was going to somehow change the world. And then I realized, well, that might not be really realistic because it's a big world. And then I read a quote one time about that we may not be able to change the capital W world, like the world in general, but the lowercase w world, which is the universe I'm around. And so what can I do to help someone else's life in some meaningful way in just my day to day and a universe of the people that I come in contact with, and so that really has driven me to want to do that. Yeah, but that's a great. It is interesting, Simon, because you said I know listening to you have come from the same place, and wondered was there something that sparked that in you, or is it similar, just wanting to help others along their journey?
Yeah, there's a big driver, excuse me, to leave better than I find things, and wherever I can. I'm not successful at it all the time, but there's definitely something in me that's really important. Is how do I leave something better? I think some of that's inspired through my parents, through my faith, through just my wiring. But yeah, it's a very big part of part of the reason, the rationale for doing the podcast actually is trying to help a younger generation of leaders to
Right.
learn some skills and mindsets, some methodologies that will help them to lead more effectively early on and see themselves as leaders now rather than just when they get a positional title. So that's kind of the wiring behind doing this podcast in the first place is all aligned with that, I guess. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's great.
Now, you mentioned about homelessness as well, and I see that picking up in cities. I travel a fair amount around the world, and I see it here in the UK. Just from a very practical point of view, what are some of the things that you have done? And this is about trying to blow your trumpet, or
No.
I hope that translates. But just
Yeah.
this idea of your point of like it's a big social issue, it's a big societal problem that we see, and so you could easily say, well, it's too big for me to do anything with. I'd love to just hear what you've done as an organization to help, even in some small way, to
Right.
alleviate that.
Yeah. So, I appreciate the question. So, we're in 10 states. Our offices are in 10 states, in 22 offices. And so we really try to gravitate around a unified cause that we want to try to help impact
Yeah.
and influence. And because our name is Baker Donaldson, it seems like everything we do is Baker something. So our Baker Cares initiative is that we identify a cause and a thing that we want to try to help, and we partner with we have each of our offices try to find a local organization that is helping in that space in some meaningful way, because we obviously we don't have the capability or the expertise to really drive it ourselves, and so and we partner for 3 years. So each one of our offices has partnered with a local organization. And what we've been more intentional about, because we did that for a few years, and it would be good. We would tend to have there'd be a fundraiser, and we maybe would go with them. In some instances, we would. We did some things with children's hospitals previously, so maybe we'd go at the holidays and help families wrap gifts, which are all good, very important. This time, I really wanted to make sure that whenever we have a leadership meeting in a city, we went and actually rolled our sleeves up to understand what the organization is doing, and it was really eye-opening because the challenges are so great, and some of the organizations that I see doing really great work are ones that thinking about the whole person. Like, how do you get someone who's living on the street, and some of the real tragic situations are with kids, single parent with children. And that doesn't really work to just find them a shelter where they're living with dozens of other people, because now they got kids. So organizations that look to how can we help the whole person? How can we help them with mental health wellness issues? How can we help them with even basic things like getting a driver's license and a bank account, some job training skills, preparing for interviews, all the whole spectrum to then ultimately be in housing. And so what we've tried to do is, first of all, like our board meets, we go on drive arounds and with organizations and see their work. We've helped serve dinners to individuals. We've had tours of locations where they're building new like studio housings. There's a organization in Memphis that's trying to build studio housing for that specific situation of a mom and a couple children that can be like a transition place to ultimate permanent housing. So and then we do have funds to help like buy or commit the funds to help build a studio house, things like that. So It's a little bit the whole spectrum, but some of it is really just awareness, and that way individuals can then jump in and engage where they feel comfortable doing so. So those are just some of the things we've done, and it actually also built into, which we could talk about, this whole idea of a nonprofit I started called Everybody Leads, about helping to bring basic leadership training and skills to underserved communities, which would be this type of community, because these organizations are doing great work preparing basic life skills, but then now when somebody has a job, they've got to think about conflict resolution and teamwork and showing up. And so really trying to help further that cause. So those are some things we've done organizationally, and even me personally, having been inspired now by seeing this great work across 20 offices, 20 locations.
Yeah. So let's get into talking about some of the leadership lessons. But actually, before we do that, could you just give us a sense of scale of Baker Donaldson as well? So you mentioned 20 locations. I mean, how many employees work for the organization, etc.? Give us a little bit of a portrait of that.
Sure, we have total 1,300 employees. About 680 of those are lawyers or solicitors, I guess, or lawyers and or policy advisor, government relations individuals, and the rest would be business services professionals and staff. But 1,300 people in 8 states, and primarily in the Southeast United States, up to Baltimore is kind of our most northern city.
Okay, I said I was going to get onto the 3 leadership things, but I can't help asking, how do you engage your executive to also focus on those areas? Like to do the not-for-profit piece?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Some of it is just, I've been in this role for 4.5 years, and and my predecessor had been CEO for 20 years. We had a search process. It was internal because that's just kind of the nature of this particular organization. But within my, pitch of why my vision for being CEO, one of my 4 pillars was that I thought that we had a real obligation to have a grander vision. I mean, the vision for the firm, serving our clients, making money, being profitable, but the grander vision of giving back and doing. So I think it was part of who I am and what I pitched to then become the CEO. So some of that was almost grounded in there. But then it's like we have a board meeting and we move our board meetings around. They're coming to the city. Here's the agenda. We're going to show up at 3:00 and we're going to go tour this facility. And I mean, schedule. It's not like I don't like say, hey, the law practice is not command and control. It's very flat. So I like really just encourage them. And then people talk about how inspiring it was after the fact, and people don't want to miss the next time. So those are some ways that we've done it.
Well done. Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's get to your leadership lessons, and then I expect we'll still revisit some of the things we've been talking about. But what are the 3 leadership lessons you wish you'd learned earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great framework to think about. I think one certainly is around this idea of like discipline. I wish I'd been more disciplined in how I prioritize my time and my schedule and actions that would compound over time. I think everything when I was younger, it was all about, I still had energy and passion to drive forward, but it was more like the individual day and not looking at how I could really leverage and maximize my actions to build over time. A silly example is like listening to, and there's nothing wrong with listening. I love music. I love listening to the radio, but like listening to talk radio and news shows driving to work every day. And then later on realizing I can use that time to learn and grow by listening to books on tape or podcasts. And there's nothing wrong with news and there's nothing wrong with talk radio, but like that's a compounding effect. If I'd been doing that as a 20-year-old with my first job, I might have earned an MBA by now. Those are the type that discipline. I don't know if I'm really explaining it, but I think I could have been much more disciplined. Yeah,
I understand it. What's your second point?
So I think around this idea of just to be more curious and to try to learn every day and try to keep learning. I think sometimes, here I came out of law school, you think you're supposed to know everything, and really you can't ask questions because that means you didn't learn. And so just this whole idea, because now I realize, 30 years later, I don't know much of anything, and I'm only going to learn by asking questions and listening and trying to get better and learning. So I think that whole idea about being curious is something I probably did not do a good job of as a young professional.
And your last one?
Yeah, the last one, I think it's been highlighted at different parts during my journey, but it really becomes even more evident since the pandemic. But I wish I had listened more to the importance of self-care, managing my own self-care, mental health, wellness, my schedule to have time to refuel and re-energize and to get away from everything. Because that's how I'm going to show up as a better leader if I'm making sure I'm taking care of myself. And I think early on, I'm just driving 100 miles an hour, and I'm just going to get it all done. Because I've always viewed myself, I believe I'm not the smartest person around, but I also have to work hard to kind of catch up. That's how I've kind of always driven myself. But I can only do that so long before then you just need to I need to have my downtime. Like I love Saturday mornings because it's like I go for a long run. I do some reading, and I just kind of refill my cup for the next week. So that I learned that through the school of hard knocks. I wish I'd learned that a lot earlier in my 20s.
I understand that very well. Excuse me. But I think that's one of the life lessons that's hard to understand when you're in your 20s, if you're in good health, you've got a lot of energy. Energy feels like it's infinite. Recovery time is very short, and so what is this about self-care? It's easy.
I don't need it. Right.
I think when you get a bit older, it feels like that energy depletes a lot quicker. It takes a bit longer to recover.
It does.
I play volleyball every week, and I've jarred my fingers a few times in the last couple of weeks, and they're just taking a long time to heal, and I want to keep playing, and I've got these fingers that are kind of fractured and those kind of things. And it's when I was in my 20s, it'd be a little easier.
It would be easier. I think there's also, I felt this as when I was in my 20s, there was like a stigma too, that you did have to have it all together. And maybe that's lessened as we've come through the pandemic. But I guess I was in my late 20s, and I had made partner here at it was my prior firm I was at. And I was feeling a lot of anxiety and stress about, like, now I had to develop business. I had to do more things. And I didn't even know, I don't know if a similar thing over there, we have what we call EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. And at first I thought, well, I can't take advantage of that thing because then the people are going to think I'm weak or whatever. And so there is a stigma. But I did. And it was really helpful. And that was really just a series of like 3 or 4 counseling sessions. And it helped me get more grounded on what I was doing, and that was it. And then I didn't need something like that again for a decade when I then came back on some other issues. But I think it's the stigma too, particularly because of what you said, Simon, because as a 20-year-old, we've got it all together, and we don't need anyone else's help. But I think, that's what those professionals are there for, to help us navigate our life. So anyway.
Good. Yeah, thank you for being so open about that. I guess let's go back to that first one. You talked about being more disciplined with time management as a key point, and I love this phrase of actions just compounding over time. I think that's a really good way of thinking about that. I guess how thinking about now and your role as CEO and the multiple hats that you have to wear associated with that. What are some of the things that you have as disciplines in your schedule that we could perhaps learn from?
Sure. I think there's a few things, but one that, and it actually connects to the self-care too. I have what I call my daily disciplines that I've really helps me to just stay energized and focused, to drive through the day. And I can tell when I don't do them, it's just, I'm not as effective, but it's things like I exercise. It's like some reading, some inspirational reading, some journaling, and healthy eating. That's, I consider that, and getting good night's sleep, which again, wasn't focused on that as much when I was younger, but there is a value of just, and I get up early. I'm like a 4:30 a.m. person to get up and get going,
Right.
but then I'm going to bed early. So, I mean, it's just, you
Yes.
got to figure out your own schedule, right? But it's that if I'm executing on all those pretty regularly, then I feel like I have more energy and I'm better able to lead my folks than when I'm not. So that's sort of like personally, and then organizationally, one thing that's been really hard for me, and it was hard for me, throughout my career, is really what are those things that I can drive and add the most value and benefit to the organization, most leverage my time, and then if it's something that maybe someone else can do better, then leave that for someone else to do. And I tend to end on that. I'm on that spectrum of being a people pleaser. So I would want to, somebody calls about something, I want to go help solve that problem, where that maybe not be my highest and best use to drive the organization forward. So I've really had to try to be disciplined about being clear about what are my most important priorities, my, MVPs, most valuable priorities that are mine. And then if it's not within that, really think about, is there someone else that should be doing that, to delegate it to, or to ask someone else, or maybe not to do it. It's hard for me about even like going on a trip to visit an office. It may not be the best thing right now because I need to be over here. So those are some things I just try to really work at, to try to think about. And I've got a coach who keeps telling me that I still need to keep working on prioritization. So I could probably talk about this for a while, but
I think it feels like a bit of an eternal quest. I mean, some people have absolutely nailed it, but different chapters require different aspects of you. For example, in the last couple of years, I've become a grandfather, and so that's just another role there, one I love, by the way.
right.
But it's like, oh, right, that's a dynamic that's changed in my life now, that I need to think about how I serve best, and different client demands, that you can get a nice stable kind of diary, and then
Right.
a client appears in a different part of the world, or something else that's interesting that just could throw your schedule off. So I think it is one of those areas that I've found I've gone through phases of then having to reset and adapt to what the current circumstances require of me. Sorry, that sounds reactive. I don't mean it like that, but just recognizing like a system I had when I had a really good time management system. I was brought up on the Franklin Covey time management system years ago. And then I found that some of the methods that I find as an individual contributor weren't serving me as well when I then became a manager, and just had to make those switches. The system was still fairly robust, but the way I used it had to change, had to adapt to the new role that I'd assumed. And so things like that, I guess, require different proportions of time, I guess.
Right. Depending on I think that's really wise, Simon, about the stage you're in, and it's interesting when you mentioned Covey. I think it's a Covey publication, The Four Disciplines of Execution. I don't know if that's a book, and part of that go ahead. I'm sorry.
God, I was going to say, I think Chris McChesney or something like that,
right.
I think is the author, but I might be
it
wrong.
is. No, you're exactly right. It's I know it's back here on my bookshelf right behind me, because it's one of my but I mean, the thing about that, if you can really get laser focused on what your priorities are, then I mean, we all come through the whirlwind of the day, is what that book says, and so you're going to get pulled off track. Even with a grandchild, right? There might be a need that you need to be somewhere for a birthday party that day. That's kind of, I wouldn't call it the whirlwind, but those things happen that you're not expecting. Or your grandchild show up at your office when you've got a big coaching session, right? I mean, oh, okay. But then once the whirlwind dies down, then you come back to your priorities. So I thought that's always been really helpful. So I think you're right, and you're right. It's time management, but then it's also, you got to be taking into account like your stage and what you're dealing with at that particular moment, right? I mean,
So you're. What I've taken your counsel there is around the importance of daily disciplines being really important, and understanding what those are for you. Part of that is connected to your last point you said in terms of self-renewal and just being mentally ready for what the day has ahead, because I expect there's quite a lot of unexpected events that will occur. But you're kind of set up for success by the things you're doing at the start of the day.
Right. No, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. And then something that, I mean, because I really love, I mean, what you talked about, Simon, I think is really, like I said, I think I called it wise. It really is wise. This idea that there are certain times in your life or phases where your day to day may not be exact. You might not be able to follow that exactly. And I like to think of them as like sprints. Sometimes I've got something I've got to get done. And so like I'll think of if I can define a time frame that I may have to work extra hard and it's 6 weeks or 90 days, but I know but I've got a real focus on what I want to accomplish. I think that's another discipline I've used too, that instead of just going full out all the time, but I know, okay, this next 6 weeks, we got to have a 6 weeks execution on launching this new vision, let's say. And so that's going to take a lot of extra time and effort and to get it done. But then once it's done, it's launched. And so that's another time frame to your point about phases and everything. So anyway, I just thought about that.
I have another question in this topic. The time spent in meetings. Leaders can spend an awful, well, not just leaders, anyone can spend a lot of time in meetings and getting the most out of that. Again, any top tips on how we can make sure meetings are effective?
You know, I agree. We spend way too much time in meetings and things that could get done without meetings. But one thing that I've been working the last couple of years on that I wish I'd been doing a long time ago is really looking at every meeting that I'm going to schedule and what's the outcome I want from that meeting, and then back into the agenda and make sure that that agenda is going to help me get to the outcome. And I don't do it enough, but every time I do it, it always tends to be a more productive meeting. And so that's something that I've really tried to be laser focused on, getting that agenda, not just, hey, let's just get on a meeting and talk about it. I mean, there's times you have to. There's some crisis has come up or something, and we just all need to get on a call and real time deal with whatever the situation is. But for things like board meetings, we have business unit or department head meetings. I try to be more intentional about, if I'm going to take time out of your day and you're a billing lawyer who's serving clients, I need to have a really good reason that I'm going to use this much time. So, so I try to do that.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. Hey, I want to make sure that we talk about Everybody Leads as the organization, and just could you give us the origin story for that?
Yeah, I'm as you said, I don't have grandchildren, but I'm in probably the same era as you. My daughter's 25 and getting married in February, so we're in that stage. But so I had a friend ask me, what's Tim plus 5 years or Tim plus 10 years? What does that look like? Because I've been doing the role 4.5 years. We launched a strategic vision for the firm that'll run through 2028. So, my thinking is I'll get through 2028, maybe then think about transition, but I'll still be in my early 60s. The way that our bylaws are set up, I could come back and start practicing law full time and build my practice back up and all of that, which is great. But then I also started thinking, well, what else could I do? And I had this idea, well, maybe it would be go take whatever leadership lessons I've learned to maybe work for a nonprofit. Give back in that way. And my friend said, well, why don't you start one? Why don't you start a nonprofit? And I said, well, that's kind of silly. I mean, and I said, well, maybe when I get to the end. And he said, no, you got to spin it up now so that you can build it, and have something that you could really do. So that the origin of it was really just that seed. And then as we were talking about, well, what would that look like? I just am passionate about leadership and the belief that everybody's a leader. As you said early on, you don't need a title. So I thought, well, there's so many opportunities in I think where basic leadership skills can really help change a person's life and trajectory. I mentioned the folks who may be coming out of homelessness, people who are coming back out of prison. I've got a friend who's done some work there around leadership lessons around that area. Or like I said, I've been working with a group here in Birmingham, Alabama, where it's individuals who got off track in high school, and so now they're trying to get back to get their certificate to then figure out like what's their career, and they're getting skill building. And so I've just been doing some basic leadership teaching and training. So that's kind of, and it is very much still a work in process. I'm trying to get it up and going because it's I've got a full-time job, but that's kind of the vision.
Yeah. Well, I can see the links to you talking about those people who inspire you as well. Through. So we were talking about different challenges, whirlwinds earlier, Tim, and we've just experienced one in that my internet dropped twice So fingers crossed we can get the rest of the show without disruption and and continue the conversation. So we were talking about Everybody Leads and the important role leadership plays for you and some of the initiatives you're taking. I'd love to get your definition on what leadership is.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny talking about the whirlwind. It's almost like on the whole idea of the after dinner leadership. We're around the table. We just heard a loud crash of glasses in the kitchen and we had to go fix it. And so now we're back, right?
We are. That's the spirit
that's
of
it.
the conversation,
That's right.
for sure.
So leadership, I mean, it really, a lot of it to me comes down to, really, I mentioned earlier, owning whatever your world is. I've talked a lot about one of the best leaders at Baker Donaldson is the receptionist in our Baltimore office, because she is not only the first face that sometimes clients see of who Baker Donaldson is, but if she sees something that needs to get done, it's not in her job description. She'll go get it done. It's this idea of, I think Liz Wiseman has a book called Impact Players. It's how can I be an impact player and really own and help drive the organization, the team forward, even if it's not your specific job description. So that's one level of it. And then to me, it's there's so many different characteristics of leadership. Of course, I think what Posner and Kouzes talked about, the leadership challenge, that some of the things that people look to in their leaders, like the type of traits that evidence good leaders, are things like honesty and transparency. It's people that have a vision, that know where they're going. It's things like humility, I think, is an important element of that. And people that are honest about the challenges. And so I think those are some things that I really try to live out. And that, like, again, forward thinking. We're going to have setbacks, but what are we going to do now that we had the setback, instead of getting mired down in the challenges? So those are some of the things that come to mind. But I mean, it's interesting because there's you ask 24 people, they might all say a different type of characteristic of leadership that is important. But those are some of the ones that I think have always things I try to live out myself.
Yeah. That's great. And where do you start with the work that you do with the people that you're serving?
Within the Baker Donaldson, or on the nonprofit?
Sorry, on the not-for-profit, the Everybody Leads. Yeah. Where do you start with that journey for them, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's mainly trying to identify organizations that are already doing great work, and it's really coming alongside, and it could be an added benefit. Have an intern that is a senior in college, I guess university,
yes.
And she has helped really identify, like, to really test out and pilot some of these ideas. Here in Birmingham, what are some organizations that are doing work where maybe leadership would be important? And she's talked to leaders, and then we've set up meetings and really identified some places. But then there's also, I've looked for opportunities. Our Baltimore office is partnered with, I guess it's Johns Hopkins University, and Bloomberg has a startup business incubator. And so I went up and did some leadership lessons to that incubator, something that we were already doing within the firm, to try to add some value there. And I've also partnered with some of the organizations I've met through our Baker Cares initiative around our footprint on eradicating homelessness. So it's really just trying to look for some, really the relationship that then they could add some value. So at this point.
I like that. So what, in that regard, what does the Tim plus 5 years look like?
It's I think it is going to be something around giving back through nonprofit, whether it's Everybody Leads takes off, whether it's trying to help with other organizations. It's still yet to be seen. I think I'd mentioned I have written a manuscript of a book called Everybody Leads, which takes some of these ideas and really, it's probably broader in the idea of taking stories from the trenches of actual implementing leadership skills in practice that were that have been very helpful to me. And so if that goes anywhere, there's that. So I'm still
Great.
trying to figure it all out, which I guess it's kind of like if thinking back at early in my career, it's kind of the same thing. I'm trying to figure some of this out, but I'm trying to take the next right step that I know to do, and then we'll see where the road, twists and turns, right?
Yeah, I got that. Oh, that's great. And okay, so I still think there's something here to explore around why now. So your friend encouraged you to act now rather than in 5-10 years time.
Right.
But you could still have said, no, I'll leave it to 5 and 10 years time. But you didn't. You've started taking action now. I love to just explore why now.
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. I'm not sure I really thought about it. I mean, part of it is just my nature to get an idea and then want to go drive and execute it if it's something that I get passionate about, which this is something I'm obviously passionate about. I guess it's also a combination of seeing a need that's there that I really, as I started talking about the concept, people seem to be really affirming, not just to me to, hey, affirm Tim, but like there is a need there. And then this unique journey that I've had, the opportunity to be that I didn't set out to become a CEO and lead an organization, but now I've got 4.5 years of actually in the trenches of some pretty, challenging situations with COVID and everything else. Hopefully I've learned some things that may be of benefit and value to others. And then it's interesting. I didn't come into this because I'm one of those people, like, I don't necessarily care about my title, but I know titles open doors to some things.
Yes.
And so, like, I tell my colleagues, I'll go with you to visit a client if you want, because you need the title to come along, but I'm just Tim. There is certain thing that now I've got this title. It does provide some opportunities to maybe, pilot and test some of these things to really add value to people. So that's a really good question that I need to spend more time reflecting on.
Well, for me, it falls back to almost like the discipline of time management. You clearly see it as important and adding value. You've decided to take action now. I'm just intrigued to, many people will have an idea, but then it's like, oh, I'll do that later.
Right.
And it's not necessarily procrastination. It may be something practical about it. You could argue quite easily, well, I'm the CEO. I've got lots of these other priorities. I'm too busy with important things.
Yeah, right.
To set up a not-for-profit, but then you did.
Well, my wife would say the same thing. She's like, "When do you have time?" But another thing, and I think this actually may be a good nugget for folks who are really, no matter where you are in your career, but even early on. The other thing that's that's kept this kind of going even after that initial just question, because it could have just gone away, is he's been holding me pretty accountable to, like, what are you doing now about it? And he's a good friend, but
yes.
He checks in and he does check in pretty regularly. I think he's put calendar appointments on his calendar to check in. But he's also someone who's inspiring and encouraging too. Like, yeah. Man, you're making progress. You got a mission statement put together, or, man, you hired an intern. That's great. Let's keep going, Yeah. So I think that accountability and having somebody that really is encouraging you along the way and inspiring you is important. And it's also a good reminder, pointing the finger back at myself. I need to be better about encouraging and inspiring others' dreams and pushing them along. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And I think your second point around keeping learning, here's something to just test with you. So this morning I did an hour for a webinar for the local one of our local universities.
Yeah.
Just talking to some of the students, they're on an entrepreneurial class, just about my journey, my experience, that kind of stuff. But of course, in preparing for that and also in delivering it, I learned so much about me, right. Because sometimes you don't consciously think about those things. But so I didn't do it for me, but it's interesting in giving right. to that group of 80 students, I also got a huge amount from it. One was the thrill of spending some time with them and hearing their questions.
Right.
The two was actually, that was really helpful because I don't think I've ever said that out loud before.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really is an important thing, and that is part of my ethos. And you kind of discover something sometimes in the giving of yourself that you didn't know until you entered that space.
Right. No, I totally agree. Even this whole process of the last year of even getting training materials together to go talk to, others. And then, as you said, standing up and leading and trying to get people engaged, that is a learning process. The other thing is the world is so complex and moving so rapidly that, whatever I did know yesterday is not going to be enough to help me lead effectively tomorrow, right? And I've got to keep learning. And we're in professional services industry, but I learn more from stuff outside of this industry sector, and then how can I apply that here in the law firm? And I think that's the same thing. Sometimes we get so focused on, we've now gotten our degree from university or whatever, and we're so focused on that, but you can learn so much about other areas that will help you get even better at the place you're focused on. And so I've just always found that to help me to be a better person and leader, to keep learning.
Great. Well, you've been very generous with your time and your wisdom. Excuse me. You've been very generous with your time and wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing what you have done today, Tim. And I'm really pleased that you've taken what I consider kind of the brave step, a disciplined step to act on an impulse and an aspiration to make your part of the world a better place. And I think it's a great inspiration to me, and I hope to many others of all ages, actually, that can help with that. Actually, I do have another question. I was coming to a close there. A few words. I sense this from you. I hope I'm right. I think call them Gen Z, Gen Alpha, sometimes get a bit of a bad press.
Right.
And I just would love your thoughts on your view on the potential of our 18 to 25, 18 to 30 age group. What do you see?
I do. I see this incredible unlimited opportunity and potential, and some of it is just spending time. I think we have this, we like you said, we tend to generalize and maybe even negatively stereotype people. But when you really sit down and talk to people about their passion and what they want to do, they are, that generation really wants to do good in the world and have a purpose in what they're doing. We have people in those generations that are among our hardest workers. They show up every day. I mean, I know there's people that say they don't, but they just want to they do want to impact the world for good and change the world for good. And so it's inspiring. But I think for those of us in earlier generations, it's just a matter of spending time and listening and getting to know and understand them. And I think every generation you have people that do things that, like, you scratch your head and say that doesn't make any sense. And so I think that's, it's our future, right? So I want to learn from them and help them to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish within our structure of Baker Donaldson. And we're going to have to change the structures probably based on what they're really helping us learn how to get better at. So I share your sentiment that it is a lot of opportunity there.
Great. Love it. What have you taken from today's conversation that's helpful for you, Tim?
Well, Simon, I think some of your questions really have made me think, and I'm going to go spend some more time thinking, but this idea of the different phases of our life and really stepping back and really reanalyzing even how I approach my daily disciplines and what I need to rethink, is that effective for where I am in 2023 moving forward, what was working in 2015 and 2020, and just really analyze that, and maybe I need to adapt a little bit of some of what I'm doing. So that was really helpful, just this self-analysis and reflection. So I appreciate your pushing me on that a little bit.
Okay. Well, it's been interesting for me too. I really have found this idea of the not-for-profit work that you do and the motivation for that, and using the skills and strengths and talents that you've acquired and learned over the years for good use in the wider community. And I do some of that already, but it's caused me to go in and take a look at that a bit more deeply myself. And thank you for it. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for how that inspires me. So I wish you the very best of success as you continue to do so, Tim. It's been a joy to meet with you tonight. And please do let me know when the book is published. We'll have you back on and we can talk about that. All right, Simon. No, thank you for the opportunity, and like I said, I've just been encouraged by talking to you tonight. So thank you. Great, thank you very much. Our after dinner leadership conversation is finished. Our guest has left, and you're still here. Now, of course, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you found the conversation to be engaging. There's a few things that I'd like to ask you to do before you do leave. The first one of those is if you can stop and think about somebody who you think would enjoy this conversation, a friend, a colleague, perhaps an aspiring leader. The second thing is to stop and hit subscribe or follow. And then the third thing is to start doing something. Perhaps there's a little idea or a concept that we've been discussing today that you think you could apply even a little bit tomorrow, tonight, and to put it into action. I encourage you to use this as a catalyst to do something different, do something more interesting, do something more exciting. And thank you so much for joining us. And please tune in again for another After Dinner Leadership conversation. You can leave now. I need to go and do the dishes.